Thank you, Sam. Less an introduction, more of a dating profile you just gave. Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, thanks to all of you and to the Institute for the opportunity to speak to you here this evening. It seems to me that there's a rather long and, if I might say, inglorious tradition of Scottish politicians hanging speeches around the neck of Adam Smith and his legacy. I'm sure that many of you are familiar with them, but for me there seem to be two main types. The first is what I refer to as the Gordon Brown method. Now, the Brown method is where you examine Smith's philosophy from 300 years ago, and it demonstrates that, astonishingly, it coincides almost exactly with your own policy agenda here in the 21st century. It turns out that Adam Smith was a kind of New Labour prophet just waiting to be discovered all of his time. And it's there to demonstrate that your current policy platform isn't some sort of tricksy wheeze to triangulate the left and right, all the better to scoop up the votes of Middle England. In fact, it turns out that it has a golden thread that links it right back to the heart of the Scottish Enlightenment, where before the words Tony Blair were ever heard, it was first discovered that liberal economics and social justice could go hand in hand. The fact that Smith actually came from Kirkcaldy is just that cherry that sits on the top of the cake. I can only say that if I were Gordon Brown, I'd be pacing up and down for a start. If I were Gordon Brown, looking for some kind of ballast to hold my political beliefs together, I probably wouldn't have been able to resist that sort of speech either. But that isn't actually the only type of Adam Smith speech that you can get. There's a slightly shabbier version of the Brown method, which adds to it a great dollop of parochialism mixed with no little amount of hubris. And that's the sort of speech where politician B seeks to assert that pretty much everyone has got Adam Smith wrong from day one, apart, of course, from the speaker himself. And why have they got him wrong? Well, broadly speaking, in this sort of speech, it's because they are not Scottish. And in not being Scottish, they therefore fail to understand the true meaning of Adam Smith. And target number one in that criticism is, of course, the Adam Smith Institute. Far from being an organisation set up to carry forward the example of Smith's ideas, declares said politician, the Adam Smith Institute is by itself a sham. It is a misrepresentation, and it's clearly an imposter, and if proof were needed of this, is because it does not have an office in Scotland. As an institute, it looks only at the wealth of nations, it only looks at the invisible hand and the free market stuff. It forgets entirely, says politician B, piously, that Smith was also the author of the theory of moral sentiments, and that Smith also thought about the good society as well. Not like all you right-wingers in London who have tried to appropriate Smith for a Thatcherite inheritance. So politician B, while he's strolling around, continues, you all don't get Smith, not like him. In fact, he thinks to himself, no one understands anything about Scotland quite like him. No one indeed is half as Scottish as he is. I speak, of course, of the Salmond method. I'm slightly exaggerating, but I swear I'm only slightly exaggerating. So let me reassure you this evening that I promise to try and do two things. I will steer clear of both the Brown method and the Salmond method. I promise no claims of Adam Smith as a paid-up member of the Scottish Conservative Party, not even a £3 entryist. And I will attempt not to preach about why all of you have got Smith completely wrong, and only I have the answer to what he was really trying to say. I do, however, take one lesson from those examples, and it's this. If politicians of all types and tribes can find an echo in Smith's writings that support their own case, it's because he speaks to something that's quite essential in our humanity. He speaks about the things that unite us all, no matter what our politics are. So I see Adam Smith as a great Scottish humanist. Not for him the grand delusions of men of systems who seek to organise the world to their own ends. He recognised that people aren't pieces on a chessboard. They're not supposed to be moved around just by outside forces. And he saw us for the individuals that we are. And from this basic insight flowed everything. His liberal outlook on life, is practicality that Sam talked about, and a sense of justice. And he eschewed the simplistic booming slogans of the 1770s, promising that they were going to impose equality, liberty, fraternity on everyone. Smith's view was far more optimistic, that being essentially virtuous, it is best for society if people are allowed to pursue their self-interest. As Eamon Butler, who I've just met and I'm delighted is here today, says in his excellent primer on Smith, he understood that we humans are complex, that we act out of self-interest, of course, but also out of sympathy with our fellow man and woman. If we're not chess pieces, then nor are we islands either. A Wealth of Nations and the Theory of Moral Sentiments express this complexity perfectly. They are, as Eamon writes, complementary attempts which show how self-interested human beings can live together peacefully and productively. So my lecture this evening is entitled Lessons from Adam Smith, the Need for a Scottish Alternative. Doesn't really fit in 140 characters, I'm sorry. And I'm going to start by asking how we're getting on with that task in Smith's homeland, living together peacefully and productively. And I repeat that I won't try to divine what Adam Smith would have made of the current political landscape in Scotland. What follows is my own analysis of the situation that we face. And I'll then set out the problems and issues that I identify flowing from the current nationalist regime, and how we in the Scottish Conservatives are determined to set out a clear Scottish alternative to that ahead of yet another electoral test in May of next year, when the Scottish parliamentary elections are held. So firstly, where stands Scotland? Well, in less than a month's time, we will mark the first anniversary of the referendum vote. And what's clear is that the echo of that referendum still dominates our politics. Most obviously, we saw this in the general election in May. In the referendum, 1.6 million Scots voted to leave the United Kingdom. It wasn't enough to gain secession, but put that voting bloc in a first-past-the-post system, and it represents a winning hand. And that's what happened in May. Most of yes voters, almost all in fact, 1.4 million, stuck with the one significant party that had backed yes last September. And by contrast, no voters were divided among the three pro-UK parties. And inevitably, the outcome was that the SNP won practically every seat. This perhaps explains the paradox of a country which rejected independence last year, only to then hand a landslide to the one major party which backed it 9 months later. And in case you're wondering, the election of the self-styled 56 at Westminster hasn't actually led to a surge in support for independence. Scotland stands pretty much where it was. Which explains the other paradox in all of this, which is why Nicola Sturgeon, despite her party's success, is not, as we speak, leading a fresh charge for separation ASAP. With the oil price sinking ever further below $50 a barrel, and with the White Paper's case for independence getting more absurd by the day, she's in no great rush to lead her party into the valley of death. She knows that going too early would likely result in a heroic failure. She also knows that the SNP can't afford another loss. Alex Salmond wrote a book which he entitled The Dream Shall Never Die. It was a memoirs book, and more accurately for the SNP, it should probably be The Dream Must Never Die. And the dream must never die because if it did, then the SNP would be in large part over. It would be the end of the road for the nationalists. Because travelling hopefully to arrive is all that keeps many in the movement held together with their political polar opposites in almost everything, except for the Constitution. And all the evidence now suggests that the SNP would lose that second referendum. And as we know from Quebec, a second loss, no matter how small, is enough for that dream to fall to its death from a pretty high cliff. So Nicola Sturgeon knows that she needs to keep that dream travelling down the road for some time yet to come. And that's where we stand politically in Scotland. We stand with a ruling party which wants another referendum, which fears going ahead and having one. And that's where our problem lies. Simply put, under this nationalist administration, we face inertia and drift. And instead of focusing on the things that matter, things like more jobs and better schools, a health system that works, fixing a Frankenstein of a single police force entirely of their own making, instead of all of that, We have an SNP administration which has parked Scotland in a constitutional gridlock. We are run by a party which knows it has to keep power and keep control so that it's ready when finally something comes up to help them. Maybe it will come from the form of instability in the Middle East, which suddenly pushes North Sea oil past $100 a barrel. Maybe it will be something absolutely ridiculous that no one could see happening, like Jeremy Corbyn being elected leader of the Labour Party. Either way, the SNP is a past master at waiting for opportunities and then exploiting them to the full with nothing but the goal of separation in mind. And my point is this: the SNP might be happy to wait, but Scotland can't afford to wait. We can't afford another few years of hanging around, looking up at Nicola Sturgeon every day to see whether she's made up her mind about whether she wants another referendum. Not when we're failing to tackle the underlying problems in our society. In short, we can't afford 5 more years of this SNP government. Because you can forget about all the spin of the SNP competence for a moment. It was always a myth, and one which was only believable because for all of the SNP's failings, they at least had the merit of not being Scottish Labour. The truth is that this government is taking Scotland backwards. If you examine the facts of the SNP, it's pretty far from the self-satisfied and slick presentation that you guys probably see down here. The reality is that this is a government which is characterised by a desire, first and foremost, to control. Its first instinct is to seek to impose a centralised, statist system across all walks of public life, because more control means greater chance of branding the separatist logic across Scotland and beyond. And the effects of this centralising top-down agenda have been overwhelmingly negative. If we look at health, where political control over the NHS is now tighter than ever, we have a system that is teetering on the edge. Again, if you forget the SNP rhetoric about Tory austerity being the cause, the Institute of Fiscal Studies found that NHS spending in England had risen by 5% in real terms since 2009, compared to a cut of 1% in Scotland over the same time frame. And this is despite the fact that austerity has been less in evidence in Scotland than down south. Departments in England cut by 13% compared to 8% in Scotland. And far from using this money to get better effect, however, reforms have been shunned and central control has been tightened, and the result of that is that in the most recent survey, fully 60% of NHS consultants say that bureaucracy is making it very difficult for them to do their job. In education, the system is, if anything, worse. The pattern is familiar. Moves like those by the Conservative government in England to weaken centralised control, to free up schools, to get teachers innovating, have been blocked in Scotland. Instead, a top-down system has been kept in place, all the better to ensure full political control. And if you give another example, not so long ago, Scotland would take part in 2 leading international literacy and maths study. The problems were that they tended to show Scotland was not performing so well as other nations. So the SNP did what any responsible government would do. It withdrew Scotland from the studies. Problem solved. Unfortunately for them, other studies are still being published, and they continue to show that our numeracy and literacy levels are falling. And furthermore, the gap between the richest and poorest in society remains obstinately wide. And the SNP's response to this disgraceful state of affairs has been illuminating. It is, of course, page 1, paragraph 1 of the SNP playbook that it shuns any reform that is being promoted by the hated Tories. Rather, the SNP's response has been true to its own statist and centralising values. First, it has legislated to force councils which run schools to close the attainment gap. Next up, they'll pass a law to ban bad weather in Glasgow. Secondly, it's wheeled out a chequebook and has found about £100 million down the back of the sofa to be spent on closing the attainment gap. But if you ask how or with what strategy or framework or benchmarks, you get blank stares. Don't ask, there is no answer. And thirdly, the SNP puts its fingers in its ears to all criticism. Only last week, the facts showed that while the proportion of the poorest 18-year-olds going to university in England is rising, the number in Scotland is actually going down. In fact, the situation is worse in Scotland than in any single other part of the UK. The SNP had no response to the cold hard facts, so it simply claimed the figures were not comparable. It's the SNP way, the old-fashioned command and control of government, given a New Labour spin and topped with a dollop of pious self-congratulation. And the examples are legion. This is a government that took the decision to turn 8 police forces into one, a single force which now feels in no way accountable to the local communities it serves. It's a government which, in a newly published higher education bill, seeks to extend state control over the way Scottish universities are run. It is a government which has shunned autonomy and local authorities to the extent that we are now seen as one of the most centralised nations on the planet. You get the picture. So we need to change in Scotland, and this is soon to become all the more urgent. Because starting from next year, vast new financial powers are to be transferred to the Scottish Parliament, and the old ways will simply no longer do. Already, ministers in Holyrood have control over the stamp duty we pay on the purchase of property and have made a complete hash of it. And to that power soon will be added complete control over income tax, over the proceeds of VAT, and over £2.5 billion worth of benefits currently delivered by the UK government. I have welcomed the transfer of these powers to Holyrood. Indeed, it was the Scottish Conservatives' own recommendations which are now being carried through by the UK government. And I did so because I believe that governments like the SNP will never be responsible or accountable unless they have to look taxpayers in the eye. Devolution in this country created a fault line, allowing newly appointed Scottish ministers and Welsh and Northern Irish to flash the public chequebook without ever having to ask ordinary working people to hand over their hard-earned money in the first place. And the reforms that are coming will change that. No longer will the SNP be able to say that everything good in Scotland is because they've spent money on it, and everything bad is because that nasty Westminster didn't give them enough. And it is my fervent hope that the discipline created by this new system will finally force parties like the SNP to face up to the consequences of their actions, that we finally start incentivising the right kind of policies. And this is where we, the Scottish Conservatives, come in. Because let me correct another myth for you. Scotland is not a socialist nation. Yes, the parties of the left have been in predominance in recent years, but the idea that Scots are yearning to pay more tax so that they can have even more enormous welfare provision simply is not true. One of the spectacles I've most enjoyed at the current Labour leadership contest has been the sight of Owen Jones, the sage of Stockport, declare how a lurch to the left under Jeremy Corbyn will help win back Scotland. Well, good luck with that one, Owen. Because the facts are these. Only around a quarter of people believe benefits are too low and cause hardship. Only around 40% want government spending to increase. The vast majority think the UK government policy of the welfare cap is the right way forward. The idea that Scots are yearning to pay this more tax to fund ever higher welfare policies just doesn't hold. Even Alex Salmond once commented that Scotland, quote, didn't mind the economics of Lady Thatcher, and for once he spoke for a nation. What Scotland wants, I believe, are parties of heart and head. Parties which know their way around a balance sheet, but have a beating social conscience at the heart of their policy offer too. And this is what the Scottish Conservatives have to offer. And with more financial powers at Holyrood, it will be ever more relevant and necessary. Very soon, it will be for Scottish ministers to decide on the income tax rates of Scottish taxpayers. Scotland will need to raise income from its own taxpayers, not solely from a block grant. And the approach of our opponents on the left has been predictably nonsensical. Scottish Labour's new leader, Kezia Dugdale, was barely in the job a week before stating her desire to raise taxes on middle and high earners. This, of course, will receive the warmest welcome from George Osborne, as its most immediate impact will be to encourage Scotland's top-rate taxpayers to leave the country for south of the border. It is Labour at its most typical, born of legitimate intentions, but utterly naive and self-defeating. As Conservatives, we set out a different course. What we need isn't a policy designed to deter high earners from Scotland. What we need is the ambition to attract earners across the whole spectrum to help boost public services. At the last count, Scotland had just 14,000 additional rate taxpayers. That's 5% of the UK total, a level far below our population share. I want to see the Scottish Government commit to matching the UK average, so we have another 10,000 additional rate taxpayers living in Scotland, growing the income of working Scots, as well as attracting the brightest and best from across the UK. And the benefits of that would be huge. At a conservative estimate, it would increase tax revenues in Scotland by £1.5 billion a year. That is enough to pay the salary of every school teacher in the country, all 50,814 of them. And it is not unachievable. We can make this happen, and we do that first by guaranteeing that tax rates in Scotland will be no higher than the rest of the UK, something that I urge the Scottish Government to do immediately. It will send out the right message to everyone from across the UK that Scotland is not about punishing earned wealth. And secondly, I want to see us in Scotland rolling out the red carpet to our neighbours right across the United Kingdom. And I make this call deliberately this evening in London. As a Brit, I consider myself fortunate that we live in a country with this global hub on our doorstep. A city which, in the last 20 years, has gone from being one of the also-rans to become a challenger for the world's capital. London is an incredible asset for a country the size of the United Kingdom, and I want the rest of the UK to get more out of London. Under this Conservative government, we are seeing great efforts to ensure that the success of London is felt right across the country. Manchester and Birmingham are increasingly impressive alternatives to the capital, and we're seeing a flowering of confidence across the UK. And I want to see Scotland capitalising on that too. But there is a problem, and it's that the SNP government keeps sending the wrong messages. Politics is all, and the SNP's interest lies in continually trying to find a wedge to drive between us and the rest of the UK. 2 weeks ago, the SNP made an entirely populist decision to ban GM crop development in Scotland. Will a well-paid scientist or biotech expert bring her family to the country now? I don't think so. And over the summer, the SNP, egged on by Labour, set an equally populist ban on fracking. Will that encourage engineers to come and find opportunities here? I don't think so. And I know from speaking to business leaders at home that there are real worries that we're missing out on this great British revival. They worry that uncertainty over our future will make us less of a competitive alternative. I want a Scottish government that unambiguously and enthusiastically seeks, attracts and retains the best talent that Britain has, and which recognises that we need to be in the hunt for that talent. In Glasgow, the city I'm proud to represent, 15,000 new jobs have been created through the success of the new international finance sector. I want to attract 15,000 more people who otherwise might feel the pull of London's capital. And in engineering, the creative industries, the life sciences and academia, it should be our absolute priority to market Scotland as the best place in the UK to do business. And if I may borrow a line from Adam Smith for a moment, I do so for our self-interest. We are in the market now for human capital. We need more taxpayers to help us pay our way. And that's why Scotland can't hang around, waiting for Nicola Sturgeon to decide what it is she's going to do. We in Scotland need to put the constitutional battle behind us and get on with earning a better living in the world. Now, I fear I may have talked slightly too much about Scotland to a London-based audience already, but I do believe that it is vital and necessary to speak up, because there is a danger within the UK that we sleepwalk away from one another. A danger that people in other parts see only the voices from the SNP and assume that they automatically speak for all Scots. It was never the case, and it certainly isn't now. I'm determined to speak up for the Scots who want that alternative voice to be heard. Not a view that always seeks to put the constitutional question first, which tries to drive a wedge between Scotland and the rest of the UK, but a voice for the many thousands of Scots who know that by staying in the United Kingdom, we can build stronger foundations for us all, who recognise that Scotland exports twice as much to England, Wales and Northern Ireland as we do to the rest of the world combined. You're not just our neighbour, our brother in this family of nations, you're also our best customer. And I'm determined to be a voice which stands up unashamedly for the conservative values that are held deeply by so many, and yes, in Scotland too. The view that people make better decisions about their lives than the state, that hard work should be rewarded, that aspiration and opportunity shouldn't be dirty words, that a pound in the pocket is better spent by the person who earned it than some nameless, faceless government official. A belief in the invention and the creativity of people, and where governments get in the way of that, they should remove themselves from the field. A belief that there is no such thing as government money, only the money that governments take from the people and businesses of our country, and they should take less of it. And an unshaking belief that it is the most natural thing in the world to want to build a better life for your children than that which you enjoyed, and that you should be praised and not upbraided for attempting to do so. We need to champion genuine school choice precisely because children learn differently and should have the opportunity to be taught differently. We need a police force that represents the communities it serves, not feels remote from them. A health service that backs doctors' clinical assessments, not buries them in target ticking. Universal values of responsibility, of hard work, of just reward, of helping those at the bottom and clearing a path of others to explore even greater horizons. Getting back to proper, old-fashioned, blue-collar Toryism that somehow, somewhere, half our party forgot. It's how I was raised, and it's how half of Scotland was raised too. But somehow, somewhere, we let people brand these values hard-hearted and cruel. It is Labour's greatest achievement in fighting the Conservatives that they persuaded people that our motives were malign. It was not, is not, nor ever will be the case, but we on the centre-right need to work night and day to change the script and show that it is not true. No one gets into politics to talk about marginal tax rates. I promise you, not even Sajid Javid. But such decisions matter. They can create a virtuous cycle. So if we act now to make Scotland the most competitive and attractive place to do business within the UK, it doesn't just bring in more tax to pay for public services, it does something so much more important than that. It tells kids growing up today in Dumfries or Stirling or in Adam Smith's hometown of Kirkcaldy that no matter what they want to do in life, no matter the career that they pursue, there are opportunities there for them. It allows the gamer in Glenrothes to know that they can create the next Grand Theft Auto in Edinburgh, the designer in Denny to know that this creativity can find a manufacturing base and a world market. And even better, it can encourage a Big Bang fan in Birmingham or Bangor or Belfast to think that they should come to Scotland as it's the best science and tech hub in the whole of the UK. And that's why it matters. It matters that we tell our children that they can have a better life than us. They can seize the opportunities on their doorstep, and they have a future limited only by their own ambition. So my job over the coming 9 months will be to set out that plan and to demonstrate that there is a Scottish alternative to the SNP's old politics of grievance. A centre ground plan based on work which will deliver security for Scotland and a stable future for families. It's a plan which reaches out to those who want to keep Scotland in the UK and build strong foundations for our society. There is a proper, practical, pro-UK alternative to the SNP, and we are determined over the next year to provide it. And I know I said I wouldn't do this, but if you will allow me to borrow briefly from the Brown method. In saying that, I believe our party does follow in that practical, pragmatic tradition of Adam Smith. And I'm convinced more than ever that we are within reach of winning our cause. Thank you very much.